In the heart of the Jordan Valley, where the rugged hills give way to fertile plains and the desert, breath mingles with the whisper of water, lies a place that has fascinated explorers, archaeologists, and storytellers for centuries. Jericho, a name that echoes through the corridors of time, carries with it layers of history so deep that they stretch to the very dawn of civilization. Today it stands as a modest town, surrounded by palm groves and ancient ruins, but beneath its soil lies one of humanity's greatest enigmas. Could this be the world's first city? To trace the footsteps of the people who may have built the earliest urban settlement, we must go back not hundreds, not even thousands, but more than 10 millennia into the past, into a time when the world was undergoing a profound transformation. It was the end of the last ice age, when glaciers retreated, rivers swelled, and fertile landscapes appeared where once there had been arid expanses of stone and dust. In this fragile environment, scattered groups of hunter-gatherers began experimenting with something revolutionary. They planted seeds, they harvested crops, they tamed wild goats and sheep. Agriculture was born, and with it came the first whispers of permanence, the notion that humans could settle rather than endlessly wander. It is here, in the fertile oasis fed by the springs at Jericho, that some of the earliest evidence of this new way of life emerges. Archaeological excavations reveal settlements from around 10,000 BCE, long before the grandeur of Egypt's pyramids or Mesopotamia's ziggurats. This was a community that dared to imagine life differently. The site of Tel es Sultan, the ancient mound of Jericho, rises as a layered monument of human history. Each layer, like the pages of an unwritten book, tells of a people who built, rebuilt, and reinvented their home over millennia. The lowest strata reach back to the Neolithic, when mud brick houses clustered together around courtyards, forming one of the earliest known examples of collective living. To imagine this settlement is to picture circular huts, plastered floors, hearths still dark with the remnants of ancient fires, and the hum of daily life as men, women, and children tended to their flocks and fields. They were not nomads, but residents, bound to the land, bound to each other. What sets Jericho apart from other Neolithic sites is not only its age, but its sophistication. Around 8000 BCE, the people of Jericho undertook a feat of engineering that still astounds scholars today. They constructed a massive stone wall encircling their settlement, and at its heart they built a towering structure of stone, a circular tower rising several meters high, with an internal staircase spiraling up its core. This tower, one of the oldest stone monuments in the world, suggests that these early inhabitants were not merely surviving, but organizing, cooperating, and perhaps even dreaming of grandeur. Was it a fortification against enemies, a flood defense, or a ritual monument aligned with the rhythms of sun and season? The mystery endures, and with it, the sense of awe at a people whose vision stretched far beyond the needs of the day. The story of Jericho is not a simple tale of beginnings, it is also one of resilience. Over centuries, the settlement grew, collapsed, and was reborn. Waves of inhabitants built over the ruins of their predecessors, creating a mound of accumulated history that now towers above the surrounding plain. Each new generation shaped the site anew, layering their identity atop the memories of the past. For archaeologists, this means that Jericho is not a single city frozen in time, but a palimpsest of human ambition, adaptation, and continuity. From Stone Age villages to Bronze Age kingdoms, from biblical accounts to modern discoveries, Jericho becomes less a place and more a living symbol of human persistence. The city's name itself, Jericho, is thought to derive from words associated with the moon, suggesting that even its earliest inhabitants may have woven their identity into the cycles of the cosmos. The moon's waxing and waning would have guided planting, harvest, and ritual, and the connection between earth and sky seems ever present in this cradle of civilization. In this sense, Jericho was more than a settlement. It was a worldview materialized in mud, brick, and stone, a human experiment in permanence, in spirituality, in community. When Western explorers first gazed upon the mound in the 19th century, they carried with them the echoes of biblical stories, of Joshua's trumpets, of walls tumbling down. They sought confirmation of sacred texts, yet what they uncovered was even more profound. As spades pierced the earth, the remains that emerged predated scripture, predated writing itself. The ruins whispered of a civilization older than memory, a society whose achievements pushed the boundaries of what we believed possible. In those moments, Jericho ceased to be a mere reference in a religious tale. It became the birthplace of questions about the origins of civilization itself. This is why Jericho matters. It compels us to rethink our story, to recognize that urban life did not suddenly erupt with the empires of Mesopotamia or the dynasties of Egypt. Instead, it began here, quietly, in an oasis by the Jordan, where ordinary people created something extraordinary. To walk among the ruins today is to feel the weight of that continuity. The mud brick walls, though crumbled, still exude the warmth of human hands that shaped them. The tower still looms as a reminder of ambition, and the soil beneath still hides secrets of lives long gone yet not forgotten. And so, when we ask whether Jericho was the world's first city, we are asking more than a historical question. We are asking about ourselves, about the origins of the choices that define us: settlement, community, architecture, ritual, and resilience. Jericho is not merely an ancient ruin, it is a mirror reflecting the dawn of humanity's grandest experiment, the city. To truly understand the weight of Jericho's place in history, we must immerse ourselves in the world of its earliest inhabitants, imagining not only their architecture and tools, but their daily lives, their fears, their hopes. These were not faceless figures of prehistory. They were families bound together by survival and the desire for continuity. The springs of Jericho provided what the harsh landscape around could not: a reliable source of fresh water. It was this gift that allowed a settlement to take root and endure. Around these life-giving waters, crops of barley and wheat sprouted, and the people began to secure a surplus. A surplus of food meant time, and time meant the possibility of specialization, ritual, and the slow weaving of culture. Archaeologists have found plastered skulls buried beneath the floors of Jericho's houses, carefully preserved and adorned, with shells for eyes staring out into eternity. These are not mere remnants of the dead. They are expressions of memory and continuity. The people of Jericho venerated their ancestors, keeping them close, embedding the past within the very foundations of their homes. Such practices suggest a deep awareness of identity, a sense of belonging not only to the living community, but to an unbroken chain that reached back into time. The skulls, with their haunting beauty, remind us that these were people who sought to connect life and death, to find meaning in cycles of existence, just as they found meaning in the cycles of the moon and the seasons. The presence of these ancestor cults, as some scholars describe them, indicates that Jericho was not merely a place of survival, but also of spirituality. To live here was to live within a cosmos rich with symbolism, where daily labor in the fields was intertwined with ritual observance, and where the collective ensured that the past was never forgotten. The tower and the wall, so monumental in scale, may have served practical purposes, but they may equally have been woven into this spiritual tapestry. Perhaps the tower was a stage for rituals, a marker of cosmic alignment, or a beacon proclaiming unity and shared identity. Whatever its function, its construction required immense coordination, suggesting that Jericho had already developed a level of social organization far beyond that of a simple village. In this sense, Jericho begins to resemble what we might call a proto-city, a settlement that contains the seeds of urban life. Its walls were not merely defensive, they were boundaries that defined community, separating the inside from the outside, the ordered world of humans from the untamed wilderness beyond. Inside these walls, daily life would have followed a rhythm: fields tended at dawn, animals herded under the watchful gaze of children, meals prepared over open fires and nights spent in the glow of hearths, while stories of ancestors and spirits were told. It is tempting to imagine the murmur of voices carried on the evening wind, echoing across the centuries, a chorus of humanity's first urbanites. Yet the story of Jericho is not one of uninterrupted prosperity. Archaeological evidence suggests that the settlement underwent periods of collapse and renewal. The walls were destroyed and rebuilt, houses abandoned and then reoccupied. Natural disasters, floods, or the exhaustion of resources may have forced these cycles of decline and rebirth. But with each rebuilding, Jericho's people demonstrated resilience, an unwillingness to let their community vanish. They returned to the same spring, the same mound, layering history upon history until the tell itself became a monument to endurance. The biblical account of Jericho, immortalized in the story of Joshua and the Israelites, has long dominated its image in popular imagination. Trumpets sounding, walls tumbling, it is a tale of divine intervention and conquest. For centuries, explorers sought to prove or disprove this account through the spade. When British archaeologist Kathleen Kenyon excavated the site in the mid-20th century, she revealed a more complex truth. The layers of Jericho did not neatly align with the biblical chronology, and the so-called walls of Joshua's time told a different story. Yet in peeling back the biblical narrative, Kenyon uncovered something even more astonishing: the remains of a city that was already ancient long before those events were ever recorded. Jericho, it seemed, was not merely the backdrop of a biblical drama, but one of humanity's first great experiments in settlement. This revelation forced historians to reconsider what it meant to call a place a city. If a city is defined by population density, monumental architecture, social organization, and ritual life, then Jericho fits the bill long before Mesopotamia, as Uruk or Egypt, as Memphis rose from the sands. And yet, Jericho does not quite match our modern notion of urbanism. There were no sprawling marketplaces, no palatial rulers, no sprawling bureaucracy. Instead, there was something simpler, perhaps more intimate, a tightly bound community that had chosen permanence and complexity over mobility. In this tension between village and city, Jericho becomes a liminal place, bridging the gap between the world of nomads and the world of urban dwellers. The story of Jericho also underscores the role of environment in shaping human destiny. Situated near the Dead Sea, it lies in one of the lowest points on Earth, a place of extremes where heat can be oppressive and the surrounding landscape unforgiving. Yet the oasis of Ain Sultan, the perennial spring, transformed this harsh location into a cradle of life. It is a reminder that geography and survival were intertwined in the birth of civilization. Without the spring, there would be no Jericho. Without Jericho, our understanding of humanity's journey towards settlement would be incomplete. As millennia passed, Jericho continued to evolve. By the Bronze Age, it was no longer merely a Neolithic experiment, but a fortified town, part of the network of societies that would shape the ancient Near East. The walls, rebuilt in stone and mud brick, stood as symbols of power and protection, while trade routes threaded through the valley, linking Jericho to faraway lands. This was no isolated village. It was a node in the web of early civilization, a place where goods, ideas, and perhaps even myths were exchanged. The continuity of occupation speaks to its enduring allure, a place that could never be entirely abandoned. When we step back and consider the sweep of Jericho's history, we begin to see it less as a singular site and more as a microcosm of human civilization itself. Its story is one of adaptation to environment, of innovation in architecture, of resilience in the face of disaster, and of the quest for meaning through ritual and memory. Each era layered upon the last, each generation both inheriting and reshaping what came before. Jericho is thus both ancient and eternal, frozen in time, yet alive in the questions it continues to raise. Was this truly the first city? Or is it simply the first that archaeology has revealed to us, a window into a much larger hidden world of early urbanism? What is certain is that Jericho forces us to confront the origins of community. It shows us that humanity's greatest invention was not the wheel or the plow, but the decision to live together, to build together, to imagine together. In the dust of its ruins and the silence of its spring, Jericho whispers that the city is more than stone and mortar. It is the story of us all. If Jericho teaches us anything, it is that beginnings are seldom simple, for while we marvel at its Neolithic tower, its skulls with plastered faces, its walls of stone and mud brick, we must also recognize that these were not isolated achievements, but part of a broader human transformation unfolding across the Near East. The Fertile Crescent, stretching from Mesopotamia to the Levant, was a crucible where humanity's future was forged. Along its rivers and valleys, communities were experimenting with agriculture, domestication, and settlement. Jericho's uniqueness lies not only in its antiquity, but in its continuity, its ability to adapt to shifting tides of climate, culture, and conquest. The people of Jericho were heirs to a landscape of abundance and challenge. The spring provided water, yet the desert pressed against the oasis with relentless force. The Dead Sea shimmered to the south, its mineral-rich waters offering no sustenance but shaping trade and myth alike. To survive here was to walk a delicate line between plenty and scarcity, and perhaps this tension explains the extraordinary resilience of the settlement. For resilience is not born in ease but in adversity. To endure in such a landscape required cooperation, foresight, and an unyielding will to remain. Archaeological evidence shows that the inhabitants of Jericho were among the earliest practitioners of agriculture, cultivating cereals and legumes and domesticating animals that would become central to human society. This transition from foraging to farming was not instantaneous. It was gradual, spanning generations, with periods of trial and error. Yet once established, it transformed everything. For the first time, people could generate a surplus that freed some from the constant toil of food gathering. Surplus gave rise to storage, storage to security, and security to the possibility of innovation. It was within this framework that Jericho's tower and walls emerged, not as mere feats of engineering, but as manifestations of a new social reality, one where cooperation extended beyond the family to encompass an entire community. The tower itself remains one of the most enigmatic relics of the ancient world. Rising several meters high, constructed from stones fitted with remarkable precision, it housed an internal staircase that spiraled upward into the structure. Some scholars suggest it may have been a defensive outpost, a vantage point from which to scan the horizon for threats. Others propose that it was a communal project tied to ritual, aligned perhaps with the setting sun at the summer solstice, marking the rhythm of time itself. Still others see it as a symbol of collective power, a monument built not for function alone, but to bind a community together through the shared labor of its construction. Whatever its purpose, it stands as a testament to the imagination of Jericho's people, their ability to conceive something larger than themselves and bring it into being. The wall, too, has sparked debate. Was it built to defend against enemies, against floods, against the encroaching wilderness? Its sheer scale suggests a defensive function, yet no evidence of external attackers from the earliest period has been found. Perhaps the wall was more than a physical barrier. It may have been a psychological one, a line drawn between the safety of community and the chaos of the outside world. By defining an inside and an outside, the wall created identity. Within its embrace, life had order, meaning, and structure. Beyond it lay uncertainty, danger, and the unknown. Life inside Jericho was shaped not only by necessity, but by imagination. The plastered skulls, carefully preserved and displayed, remind us that these early people were not content merely to survive. They sought to understand themselves, their place in the cosmos, their bond with those who had come before. To look into the hollow eyes of one of these skulls today is to confront the humanity of its maker, to sense the longing for connection that transcends time. These were among the first humans to wrestle with questions that still haunt us. What happens after death? How do we honor the past? How do we define who we are? In their answers, embedded in ritual and architecture, we glimpse the earliest stirrings of culture as we know it. As millennia passed, Jericho's role shifted and expanded. By the Bronze Age, it was no longer a small settlement, but a fortified town, strategically placed along trade routes that connected Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Anatolia. Goods passed through its gates: copper, obsidian, textiles, and perhaps even exotic luxuries carried by caravans across the desert. Such exchanges brought not only material wealth, but ideas, technologies, and cultural practices, weaving Jericho into the wider tapestry of the ancient Near East. Its walls, rebuilt again and again, stood as guardians of this continuity, even as empires rose and fell beyond the horizon. And yet, Jericho never became a sprawling metropolis. Unlike Uruk with its temples and bureaucracy, or Thebes with its monumental architecture, Jericho remained modest in scale. Its significance lies not in size, but in longevity. It is the persistence of Jericho that astounds, the fact that across 10,000 years of history, people return to this place again and again. Dynasties collapsed, languages changed, conquerors came and went, but the spring continued to flow, and human life continued to cluster around it. In this sense, Jericho is less a city and more an idea, an enduring symbol of humanity's bond with place. The biblical story of Jericho's fall, preserved in the book of Joshua, casts the city as a stage for divine drama. Trumpets blared, walls crumbled, faith triumphed. For believers, it is a tale of God's intervention in history. For historians, it is a reminder of how memory and myth intertwine with place. The archaeological record suggests that Jericho's walls may have fallen not in a sudden cataclysm, but through cycles of destruction and rebuilding that stretched across centuries. Earthquakes, erosion, and human conflict all played their part. Yet the myth of the tumbling walls endures, a story as powerful as the stones themselves. And in this intertwining of myth and material, Jericho becomes more than a ruin. It becomes a narrative, one that has shaped cultures and imaginations for thousands of years. Kathleen Kenyon's excavations in the 1950s brought scientific rigor to the study of Jericho, challenging earlier interpretations and peeling back the layers of history with meticulous precision. Her work revealed that the earliest walls predated the biblical period by millennia, and that the city's story was far older and far more complex than previously believed. To some, this was a disappointment, undermining cherished narratives. To others, it was a revelation, expanding our understanding of humanity's earliest experiments with urban life. Jericho, it turned out, was not merely a backdrop for biblical events, but a window into the very origins of civilization. To walk the site today is to feel that weight of time pressing down upon the earth. The tell rises modestly above the valley, yet within its layers lies a record of human endeavor unmatched anywhere else. Mud brick walls crumble in the sun, staircases lead to nowhere, and the outlines of ancient dwellings whisper of lives once vibrant. The spring still flows, as it has for millennia, feeding the palm groves that fringe the ruins. The air is thick with history, with the sense that here, in this place, the story of humanity turned a corner. We were no longer wanderers chasing herds across the plains. We were settlers, builders, dreamers, and Jericho was our first great testament. As we journey deeper into Jericho's long story, we find ourselves at the crossroads of archaeology and memory, of stone and scripture. The question of Jericho's identity has never been confined to its ruins alone. It has lived within the pages of sacred texts, in the imaginations of travelers, and in the debates of scholars. For many, Jericho is not merely an archaeological site, but a symbol, one that embodies the intersection of myth and reality. This dual identity, both as the world's first city and as the city of Joshua's conquest, has made Jericho one of the most contested and captivating places on earth. The biblical narrative describes Jericho as a fortified city, shut tight against the Israelites. For 7 days the Israelites encircled it, blowing trumpets and carrying the Ark of the Covenant, until on the 7th day, with a great shout, the walls collapsed. Whether one reads this account as literal history, metaphor, or theological allegory, its power is undeniable. The image of walls crumbling at the sound of trumpets has echoed through centuries of sermons, hymns, and stories. But what happens when the spade of archaeology tells a different story? Kathleen Kenyon's findings suggested that by the time of Joshua, Jericho may have been a ruin, its great walls already fallen centuries earlier. This raised unsettling questions. Had the story been transplanted onto an ancient site to lend it gravitas? Was the fall of Jericho more symbolic than historical? These questions highlight a larger truth about places like Jericho. They are not merely geographic coordinates, they are canvases onto which generations project meaning. To the Neolithic farmers, Jericho was an oasis of survival. To the Bronze Age traders, it was a fortified town on the road between empires. To the biblical writers, it was a stage for divine triumph. And to us today, it is an archaeological puzzle, a mirror reflecting our search for origins. The layers of Jericho's mound are more than strata of soil. They are layers of interpretation, of memory, of imagination. Each generation has reshaped Jericho in its own image, making it as much a story as a city. When we examine the physical evidence, we see a settlement that endured cycles of prosperity and collapse. Earthquakes rocked its walls, fires consumed its houses, and conquerors claimed its gates. Yet time and again people returned. The very act of rebuilding speaks to the symbolic weight the site carried. Jericho was never just another town. It was a place that drew people back, compelled by its spring, its position, its history. Perhaps there is something magnetic about continuity itself, the knowledge that one walks in the footsteps of countless predecessors. Jericho embodies this continuity, a chain unbroken across millennia. By the early Bronze Age, Jericho's fortifications were impressive, with massive stone walls and watchtowers that commanded the surrounding plain. These walls were not only defensive structures, but also statements of power, proclaiming the community's strength to neighbors and travelers. To build such defenses required coordination, leadership, and resources, suggesting that Jericho had developed a degree of political organization. Whether governed by a chief, a council, or a lineage of rulers, the people of Jericho clearly had a system that could mobilize labor on a grand scale. This marks a shift from the egalitarian Neolithic community to a more stratified society, one that mirrored developments elsewhere in the ancient Near East. Trade routes stitched Jericho into this wider world. Obsidian from Anatolia, copper from the Sinai, and exotic shells from the Red Sea may have passed through its markets. These connections reveal that Jericho was not isolated, but part of a vast network of exchange that spread across the Fertile Crescent. The goods that passed through its gates carried with them not only material value, but ideas, technologies, and cultural practices. In this way, Jericho was both recipient and contributor to the shared story of early civilization. To imagine traders arriving at its gates is to picture a cosmopolitan hub, modest in scale but rich in diversity. Yet prosperity often invites danger. Jericho's walls tell a story of conflict, of sieges and conquests. Armies coveted its oasis, and its strategic position made it a prize worth taking. The cycle of destruction and rebuilding continued, each layer of rubble and ash a testimony to the volatility of the ancient world. And yet Jericho endured. Its endurance is perhaps its most remarkable trait, outlasting kingdoms, dynasties, and empires. While great cities like Ur or Nineveh eventually fell into silence, Jericho remained, its spring sustaining life, its ruins inviting renewal. When we place Jericho within the broader context of urban origins, its significance becomes clear. Cities did not emerge in a single place or moment. They sprouted like shoots from a common root, each adapting to its environment. In Mesopotamia, cities grew along rivers, driven by irrigation and trade. In Egypt, they clustered along the Nile, shaped by the rhythms of flood and harvest. In the Indus Valley, they rose with meticulous planning, laid out in grids. Jericho, however, stands apart, older than them all, a pioneer of permanence in an age when mobility was the norm. Its very existence shows that urban life was not the invention of kings or states, but of communities, of ordinary people who sought stability and found it in the shadow of a spring. It is this ordinariness that makes Jericho extraordinary. It was not born of empire or conquest, but of necessity and imagination. Families building houses of mud brick, neighbors sharing labor to raise walls, elders preserving memory through ritual. These were the building blocks of the first city. It is a humbling reminder that civilization was not imposed from above, but built from below, from the ground up, by people whose names are lost, but whose legacy endures in the walls of Jericho. As centuries rolled on, Jericho continued to evolve, its fortunes rising and falling with the tides of history. By the time of the Israelites, it was already ancient, layered with thousands of years of memory. To stand before its ruins then would have been to gaze upon a place steeped in legend, its crumbled walls a silent witness to ages past. Perhaps it was this aura of antiquity that made Jericho the perfect stage for the drama of conquest, a story that crystallized in scripture and endured in faith. Whether or not the walls fell to trumpets, Jericho had already earned its place in the pantheon of human history. Today, archaeologists still debate the finer points of chronology, of stratigraphy, of alignment between text and ruin. But perhaps the true significance of Jericho lies not in resolving every question, but in the questions themselves. For Jericho compels us to ask, what does it mean to build a city? Why do people choose permanence over mobility? How do memory, myth, and material intertwine? In pursuing these questions, we find that Jericho is not just about the past, it is about the essence of human civilization itself. The sun sets over the Jordan Valley, casting long shadows across the mound of Tel es Sultan. The spring flows quietly, as it has for millennia. And in the silence, one can almost hear the echoes of voices, the builders of the tower, the mourners of ancestors, the traders, the warriors, the storytellers. Jericho endures, not only in stone and soil but in our imagination, as the place where humanity first dared to dream of the city. The story of Jericho is not only one of origins but of survival. To speak of it as the first city is to recognize that it has lived through more seasons of history than almost any other place on earth. Across the ages it has been burned, abandoned, resettled, conquered and reimagined, yet always it has returned to life. Its spring has never ceased to flow, and where there is water in a desert land, there is always the possibility of renewal. In this sense, Jericho is both fragile and eternal, at once vulnerable to the upheavals of history and resilient in its ability to endure them. During the Middle Bronze Age, Jericho was fortified once more with massive walls of mud brick atop stone foundations. These defenses suggest a world increasingly defined by conflict and competition. Neighboring cities rose along the Levant, each vying for control of land, resources, and trade. Jericho, though small, remained significant because of its oasis and its position along the arteries that linked Egypt, Canaan, and Mesopotamia. The inhabitants invested their labor in walls and gates, in towers and ramparts, projecting strength in a dangerous world. Yet as archaeologists have discovered, no wall, however thick, could fully protect it. Time and again, fire and sword swept through, leaving behind layers of destruction. But what is striking is not the destruction itself. It is the rebuilding that followed. Each time the city was leveled, it rose again. Families returned to its spring, laid new bricks, and re-established life upon the ruins. To do so required more than practicality. It required attachment, a sense that this place was more than a cluster of houses. Jericho had become sacred, its soil hallowed by generations. Even when the walls crumbled, the idea of Jericho endured. And so through each age the city was reborn, a phoenix rising from its own ashes. As empires expanded, Jericho became part of larger worlds. The Egyptians exerted influence over Canaan during the New Kingdom, their armies and officials extending pharaonic reach into the Levant. Scarabs, pottery, and other artifacts found in Jericho attest to this connection, revealing that the city was not isolated, but woven into a tapestry of imperial ambition. In such a context, Jericho was both a prize and a pawn, caught between larger powers yet continuing to sustain its local community. The rhythms of daily life, harvesting dates, tending flocks, drawing water from the spring, persisted even as banners of foreign rulers flew overhead. The Iron Age brought new dynamics. The biblical narratives placed Jericho at the center of Israelite memory, the city of the walls that fell. Whatever the historical truth of that story, the power of the narrative is evident. For the Israelites, Jericho symbolized the threshold into a promised land, a place where divine promise intersected with human history. Its walls, whether toppled by earthquake, by siege, or by memory itself, became a symbol of faith and triumph. To later generations, Jericho's fall was not merely an event, but a metaphor, a reminder that no obstacle stands forever against divine will. In this way, Jericho transcended its own stones, becoming a story larger than itself. As centuries passed, the city continued to transform. Under the Persians, it was a provincial center. Under the Hellenistic kings, it was reshaped by new rulers and cultures. The Greeks saw in Jericho's palms and balsam groves a land of wealth, and the Romans too coveted its resources. By the time of Herod the Great, Jericho had become a jewel of Judea. Herod built lavish palaces near its springs, complete with gardens, pools, and fortified complexes. Archaeological remains of these palaces reveal a city that had become a playground of kings, where luxury and power mingled with the enduring life of farmers and villagers. To walk in Herod's Jericho was to encounter opulence, the hum of fountains, the scent of balsam resin, the sight of marble halls gleaming in the sun. Yet beneath the grandeur, the old rhythm endured. The spring still flowed, the palms still swayed, and ordinary people continued their lives as they had for thousands of years. This continuity across change is the essence of Jericho. It is a place where time layers itself without erasure, where Neolithic tower and Herodian palace, biblical tale and Roman villa all coexist in the same soil. Few cities can claim such depth, such density of history. Jericho is at once prehistoric and modern, sacred and secular, mythic and real. The coming of Christianity added yet another layer. Jericho appears in the Gospels as the setting of the story of Zacchaeus, the tax collector who climbed a sycamore tree to see Jesus. It was here too that Jesus healed the blind, and so Jericho became woven into Christian memory as a place of revelation and transformation. Pilgrims journeyed to its ruins, seeking to walk where prophets and messiahs had walked. The city, once known for its walls and towers, became known for its stories of faith, its role in the unfolding of salvation history. Islam too embraced Jericho, integrating it into the cultural and spiritual fabric of the region. The city's oasis continued to provide life, its markets to bustle with trade, its ruins to inspire awe. Across Islamic dynasties, Jericho remained a living community, shaped by the rhythms of empire yet rooted in its spring. Crusaders came and went, Ottoman administrators ruled and taxed, yet still the palms grew and the people endured. Through all these ages, Jericho was never erased. It changed, adapted, absorbed, but never disappeared. This remarkable continuity invites reflection. What does it mean for a city to live across such vast spans of time? Most cities rise and fall, flourishing for a few centuries before fading into ruin. Jericho defies this pattern. Its survival is not owed to imperial power or monumental scale, but to something simpler: its water, its location, and its ability to sustain life. In the desert, water is destiny, and Jericho's spring has ensured that destiny for over 10,000 years. The city's resilience is thus both natural and human, a partnership between landscape and community that has outlasted empire after empire. As we look at Jericho's story, it becomes clear that calling it the world's first city is less about precise definitions and more about recognizing its symbolic role. It is the archetype, the prototype, the place where humanity first demonstrated the possibility of permanence. Its walls, towers, and skulls remind us that even in the earliest days, people were capable of dreaming beyond survival, of building monuments, of venerating the past, of shaping community. Jericho embodies the spark of civilization, the moment when humanity turned from wandering bands to settled society. Whether or not it was the very first city, it is certainly the first that allows us to glimpse the profound transformation of human life. The evening falls again on the Jordan Valley, and the tell glows softly in the fading light. The spring murmurs as it did in the Neolithic, as it did in the time of Herod, as it does today. To stand here is to feel the weight of human history pressing close, to sense that the story of Jericho is not finished. For as long as the water flows, the city endures, its tale woven into the fabric of civilization itself. The tale of Jericho unfolds not only in stone and soil, but in the imagination of all who have tried to understand it. Archaeologists with their trowels, explorers with their notebooks, pilgrims with their prayers, all have looked upon the tell of Jericho and sought to draw meaning from its layers. And yet the story they have uncovered is never simple. Jericho resists easy categorization. It is both ancient and ever new, both fragile ruin and living town, both myth and material fact. This complexity is part of its enduring fascination. The city forces us to ask questions that transcend archaeology and touch on the essence of what it means to be human. One of the great mysteries that continues to provoke debate is the true function of its earliest monuments. The great Neolithic tower with its spiraling staircase rises from the past like a riddle. To build such a structure required immense effort, coordination, and planning. But why? Was it defense, ritual, astronomy? Each theory carries weight, yet none can claim certainty. Perhaps it was all of these at once, a synthesis of practical and symbolic purposes. For the people of Jericho, the physical and the spiritual were not separate realms. To raise a tower could be at once to guard against danger and to mark the rhythms of sun and season. In that ambiguity lies the richness of Jericho's legacy. It reminds us that the first city was not merely practical, it was also imaginative, an act of dreaming carved into stone. Equally enigmatic are the plastered skulls found beneath the floors of Neolithic houses. With shells placed as eyes and features molded in plaster, they confront us with a haunting humanity. Were these relics of veneration ancestors preserved as mediators between the living and the dead, or were they tokens of identity, binding families to their homes and land? Whatever their precise meaning, they show that even at the dawn of settlement, people were thinking about memory, about belonging, about the unseen ties that unite generations. In those skulls, we glimpse the first stirrings of art, of ritual, of the search for meaning beyond survival. Jericho was not simply a cluster of huts, it was a community with a soul. The survival of Jericho across ages reveals another profound truth. The city is more than walls and buildings. It is a relationship between people and place. The spring of Ain Sultan has sustained human life for over 10,000 years. It is this continuity of water that explains the continuity of settlement. Empires rose and fell, technologies changed, religions spread, yet the spring remained, and with it, the possibility of life. In this sense, Jericho is as much a natural phenomenon as a human one, a partnership between geology and society, between desert and oasis. Without the spring, there is no Jericho. With the spring, there is always the possibility of return. And return they did. Again and again, after destruction, after abandonment, people came back. Each return was an act of faith in place, a recognition that no matter how often walls crumbled, the spring gave life anew. This cycle of destruction and rebirth makes Jericho a living parable of resilience. It teaches us that civilization is not a straight line of progress, but a rhythm of collapse and renewal. What matters is not the fall of walls, but the decision to rebuild them, the human will to begin again. When we step back and place Jericho in the grand narrative of world history, its uniqueness becomes clearer. Other cities would later outshine it in scale and power. Uruk, Thebes, Babylon, Athens, Rome, these names dominate the annals of civilization, yet all of them are younger than Jericho. They are heirs to a tradition of settlement that Jericho pioneered. To call Jericho the first city is to acknowledge its role as a pathbreaker, the place where humanity first tested the possibility of permanence. Whether or not it meets every technical definition of urbanism, it embodies the spirit of the city, the gathering of people, the building of walls, the creation of monuments, the weaving of memory. It is less a city in the modern sense than the idea of a city, the seed from which all others grew. This idea reverberates through the way Jericho has been remembered. The biblical story of its fall became a symbol of faith, of obstacles overcome. For early Christians, Jericho became the setting of transformation, where the blind received sight and the sinner found redemption. For Islamic tradition, Jericho became part of the sacred landscape of the Holy Land, a place imbued with continuity and meaning. Each era has claimed Jericho, reshaping its story to fit its own needs. In this way, the city lives not only in ruins but in memory, in narrative, in imagination. Its true walls are not those of mud brick but those of story, walls that have never crumbled. To visit Jericho today is to confront this layered reality. On the one hand, there are the ruins of Tel es-Sultan, with their crumbling staircases and weathered foundations, silent testimony to millennia of life. On the other hand, there is the modern town, bustling with markets, taxis, and people going about their daily routines. Past and present intertwine in a way that few places on earth can match. The same spring that nourished Neolithic farmers now waters modern orchards. The same palm groves that shaded Bronze Age traders now sway in the desert wind. The continuity is almost overwhelming. Jericho is not merely a site frozen in time, it is a place still alive, its story still unfolding. For historians and archaeologists, Jericho remains a challenge. Its layers are difficult to date precisely. Its chronology has been debated fiercely. Was the destruction of its Bronze Age walls caused by earthquake, by fire, by invasion? Did its Neolithic tower align with the solstice, or was it purely defensive? The debates continue, each excavation peeling back another fragment of the puzzle. Yet perhaps the uncertainty is itself part of Jericho's lesson. The first city is not meant to give us clear answers, but to remind us of the complexity of origins. Civilization did not begin with certainty. It began with experimentation, with trial and error, with ambiguity. Jericho reflects that truth in its very soil. As the light fades over the Jordan Valley, the tell of Jericho glows softly, a mound of memory rising from the desert. One can imagine the flicker of Neolithic fires, the sound of Bronze Age hammers striking stone, the murmur of voices in Herod's gardens, the prayers of pilgrims across centuries. All of it lingers, layered and interwoven, as inseparable as the strata of the tell itself. Jericho is not just a city, it is a story of survival, of imagination, of the human desire to belong. And that story, older than any written word, still speaks to us today. The story of Jericho, stretching back over 10 millennia, is more than the chronicle of a single place. It is the story of humanity's first great gamble, the decision to settle, to build, to stay, to leave behind the uncertainty of the hunt and the chase, and to embrace the uncertainty of permanence. This was not an easy choice. Settlement meant vulnerability. To floods, to enemies, to the collapse of crops. It meant building walls not only of stone, but of responsibility. Yet it also meant the chance to create something lasting, to build communities that could outlive individuals, to weave memory into place. In this gamble, Jericho was the first stake, and it has endured long enough to show us what was won. As we reflect on Jericho's legacy, we must see it not only as an archaeological site or a biblical symbol, but as a mirror of ourselves. For what is a city, if not an experiment in living together? The walls of Jericho, the plastered skulls, the tower, the palaces, the orchards, all are chapters in the long story of human cooperation and conflict, imagination and resilience. To study Jericho is to study the human condition, to see in miniature the forces that have shaped our world. The pull of geography, the power of memory, the fragility of walls, the resilience of spirit. Even today, Jericho defies simple categories. It is at once the world's oldest city and a modern Palestinian town, at once a site of archaeology and a living community. Tourists come to see its ruins, scholars to study its layers, pilgrims to walk in the footsteps of prophets. Yet life goes on. Children attend school, farmers harvest crops, families gather around evening meals. The city has not been reduced to a museum. It breathes still, its spring nourishing both palms and people. This coexistence of past and present is what makes Jericho unique. Few places remind us so vividly that history is not behind us, but beneath us, around us, within us. To stand at Tel es-Sultan gazing across the Jordan Valley is to feel the immensity of time. The desert stretches beyond, the mountains rise in the distance, and the Dead Sea shimmers in the south. It is a landscape both harsh and beautiful, a landscape that has witnessed the entire arc of civilization. Somewhere within that view, early humans gathered wild grains, learned to plant seeds, raised the first walls. Somewhere within that view, trumpets sounded and myths were born. Somewhere within that view, palaces rose and fell, and pilgrims whispered prayers. And today, that same view greets the eyes of those who come to see, to remember, to wonder. The continuity is staggering. But Jericho's story also invites humility. For all its endurance, it has never been immune to collapse. Its walls fell, its houses burned, its people fled. Time and again the city seemed destined for oblivion, and yet time and again it returned. In this, Jericho embodies the fragility of civilization itself. Our cities, our monuments, our towers, all are vulnerable. They can fall in an instant to nature or to war. What endures is not the wall, but the will to rebuild it. Not the tower, but the idea of community it represents. Jericho teaches us that the true strength of civilization lies not in stone, but in spirit. As the world today faces its own challenges, climate change, conflict, displacement, the story of Jericho resonates more than ever. It reminds us that humanity has endured before, that we have faced collapse and found renewal, that we have lived through cycles of destruction and rebirth. Jericho is proof that even in the harshest landscapes, life can persist, community can thrive, and memory can endure. The first city is also the eternal city, not because its walls stand unbroken, but because its story continues to inspire. In the end, whether Jericho was truly the first city matters less than what it represents. It is the symbol of a threshold crossed, of humanity's passage from wandering to dwelling, from fleeting campfires to enduring hearths. To call it the first city is to honor that threshold, to recognize that in this oasis by the Jordan, people dared to imagine permanence. They built, they remembered, they dreamed, and in doing so they opened the path that led to every city that followed. The evening deepens, and the last light glows on the tell. The spring whispers as it has for thousands of years. Somewhere in the shadows one can almost see them. The Neolithic builders lifting stones, the Bronze Age traders haggling at the gate, the Israelites marching in circles, the Herodian courtiers reclining in gardens, the pilgrims of centuries whispering prayers. All of them belong to Jericho, and Jericho belongs to them. And in some way it belongs to us as well, for we are heirs to their experiment, beneficiaries of their gamble. Every city we inhabit, every community we build, every wall we raise owes something to that first daring settlement at the edge of the desert. Jericho is not just the world's oldest city, it is humanity's oldest story of hope. The hope that life can endure, that community can thrive, that memory can outlast ruin. In its tower, in its walls, in its spring, we hear that hope still echoing across 10,000 years into our own uncertain future. And as long as the water flows, Jericho will remain ancient yet alive, the first city and the eternal city, forever reminding us of who we are and where we began.